Okay, I want to start by welcoming everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Margaret Martinez, and I'm a graduate student in the MBA program here at Mount Mary University, and I'm a student advocate for the Women's Leadership Institute. The studio series was created by the Women's Leadership Institute at Mount Mary in support of its mission to inspire, educate, and support women as transformational leaders in service in their communities and in the world. We are fortunate to have had an array of inspirational women share their leadership stories with us, and that will continue today. Our hope is that each of these stories digs a little bit deeper into whom these women are. We'll open it up and allow you to ask questions of your own, and we hope that you take the knowledge that you've gained and the inspiration here today and apply it in your own lives. Here at the Women's Leadership Institute, we feel it is the place where potential becomes purpose. And everyone sitting in this room has enormous potential. And the studio series is just one way to help you tap into it. I'm thrilled to introduce an amazing woman here today. Her name is Gretchen Mead. She is the founder and executive director for the Victory Garden Initiative. Gretchen has a background in social work, and it was through working in this field that she became a firsthand witness to the lack of accessibility to fresh food in urban areas. This awareness is what moved Gretchen to act. The mission of the Victory Garden Initiative is to empower communities to grow food and reawaken the relationship to human and food ecology. This mission is headed by Gretchen and a team of community gardeners that promote social justice, environmental sustainability, food security, and health and wellness. I'm inspired by the dedication of Gretchen as being a leader in the community and taking action at a grassroots level. We're honored to have her here with us today. Please help me welcome Gretchen Mead. And at this time, I'm going to let today's moderator and Mount Mary University's Vice President for Community Impact, Lynn Springer, continue with today's program.
And thank you, Margaret. Great job of setting our program into motion. You can see why we have such great, bright futures in this room. You just saw a great example. As you just heard in a beautiful introduction from Margaret, Gretchen has taken something that was really intensely personal and turned it into something that is much bigger and broader and has shared it with our community. And I think when you get done hearing from her today, you will think differently about how you eat and what you eat. And I think it'll make us all better consumers in the end. So welcome, Gretchen.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
We're going to start with what I call Gretchen's food story. And her food story really begins as a young girl, having grown up in Illinois on a farm where you said you had like an enormous garden, your family canned and hunted, and essentially your food was there. It was there, and that's how you moved into life, knowing that experience. Talk a little bit about how that informed you in terms of the food choices that your family made at that time.
Yeah, well, our life was very simple in that way. My mom stayed at home, and my dad, interestingly, worked for a meatpacking company in town that a lot of people worked for in the town that I grew up in near Dubuque, Iowa. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom that grew a lot of food, canned a lot of food. My dad hunted and produced a lot of meat for our family. And it was very much part of our economic system even. It was a barter system. It was a connection to the food source that was immediately around us and a way to supplement our income and just part of our livelihood or our way of life. And I really didn't think anything of it until I was much older and had a lot of time to reflect on my upbringing and how that was different from sort of my adult my adult life.
And how your family had this connection to the land,
Uh-huh.
that you just, maybe you assumed that's what everybody had, or that
Right.
it's, or maybe you didn't really fully appreciate what you had.
Exactly.
And then you touched on about your father worked at a meat packing plant. Your mother went to college. and your family's food life changed. Probably like a lot of us who are children of the 50s and 60s.
Right.
And all of a sudden into our lives came these processed foods, and talk a little bit about all of a sudden how you move from that really kind of back to earth to a different part of your life.
Yeah. Being connected to the land in my family was a very unspoken thing. It was just something we did. We didn't talk about protecting the environment or taking care of the animals in the forest or anything like that. It was just sort of a natural way of being because we owned land. And when you own land, you're a steward of the land. I would argue, actually, even if you don't own it, you are still a steward of it. But as things changed economically and the way the food industry specifically changed, corporations were buying and selling, and they were combining and becoming bigger and more powerful. And they were more likely to take wealth and resources and move them from the community where food was grown and where the people were that were growing that food or producing that food in some way, and move the wealth, I guess, essentially to maybe Wall Street or in a stock trade or something like that. So the blood, sweat, and tears of the people and the land and the animals where food was raised, especially in the Midwest, you may know we're considered the breadbasket of the world largely, meaning that we produce much of the world's food. So the wealth of all of that is frequently now outsourced. And there's a long period of time from community-based food systems until what are more economic-based food systems that we see today. And my family was affected by that in a very deep way because my dad supported our family through his job as a maintenance guy at the meatpacking plant, the Dubuque Pack at the time it was called. And it was something that you could do with one wage. You know, he could earn enough money. I didn't think of us as being poor or that my mom needed to go to work so that he could earn more money. He was a blue-collar guy in the military and the reserves, and this was enough. But as the changes in the industry occurred, jobs like my father's changed as well, and pretty soon they laid off everyone that worked for the meatpacking industry in Dubuque, Iowa, and moved all operations overseas, leaving, of course, a major void in the economy and devastating many, many families, including mine. And there was just no work for 2,000 breadwinners in a small community of 60,000 people, let's say. 60,000 people, of maybe 10,000 of those were breadwinners. So the math, do the math, there's no jobs, right? So my mom decides to go to college, which changes our family dynamic in a great way because she's no longer home and being the heart of our family, cooking our meals, making sure we get our homework done, all of the things that stay-at-home mothers did and still do, that was just missing. And so I always joke that that was a time of great independence for my brother and I, where we just did whatever we wanted, including dollar burgers at whatever fast food joint that we could run through in between one activity to the next to eat dinner. And this became a new style of eating for me, where I was very removed from those natural foods of my childhood, the farming type community that I lived in. And I started eating what I call the SAD diet, the standard American diet. And that's actually what happened to me. I became sad. And I I didn't feel healthy anymore. I really just started to become sick in a sort of nondescript way.
But you could feel it.
I could feel it. It took me some time. It's like the frog in the pot, slowly the water heats up and suddenly the frog says, "Oh, I'm cooking." But that's kind of how it was for me. I finally sort of woke up one day and said, "Wow, I'm not healthy." And it gave me an opportunity to take a look at what I was eating and to sort of really discover the food system, how it works, to understand the ecology of our food system, to understand the sovereignty issues of our food system. In other words, knowing what's in our food, having control over what we eat, to understand the economic and therefore security implications of our food system. Who chooses in this world who gets to eat and who doesn't? It's not based on land and resources, typically. It's only based on economy at this day and age. And one could argue for a long period of time, actually. It's been based on economic decisions, back to the days of slavery, of course. So this led me down really this, I was sort of a mad researcher for a while, trying to understand the food system, understanding my father's story, understanding my personal story, going back to my roots as a young woman in college and a young mother. I was a young mother, and so I was a single mother when I was in college. Maybe some of you are also single mothers, and I wanted to feed my children well. I didn't want to participate in this industrialized, over-processed, sad food system.
I think sometimes as consumers, we don't fully understand how much food has changed.
Right.
Even the similar products we would have bought 20 years ago have changed in terms of even their chemistry and their and you were, as you said, sort of a mad researcher in search of that. Share some of what you learned about just what had happened to food from the time that you picked it and ate it the same night, and where you were now in this place that you had ready access to food, as most of us do today.
Well, I think a lot of what transpired over many decades was the increased processing and shelf life of foods. So the wild and crazy things the food industry has done to keep things from rotting and to make them readily accessible, it really actually goes back to World War II or World War I even, when they really needed to store large quantities of food, put it in cans and ship it overseas so soldiers had something to eat. Actually, I even think maybe Spam came from that period of time. It was a meat they could put in a can and they could, send over there and it would stay forever, until someone needed it. But I went down that rabbit hole of reading every single label under. Actually, I still don't understand what any of the scientific names are in the back of the food, and that is an indicator to me that I should not eat it if I can't read it, if I can't recognize it as something that came from the earth. It's probably not in my best interest or has been under-researched, over-promoted, overutilized by the food system for reasons that aren't in my best interest. So I don't eat those foods. Something else that's happened in a really major way is really the excessive production of corn syrup. So our farming system is now based on commodity crops rather than a community-based food system that feeds the community where the food is grown. But it doesn't feed anymore the people that grow the food even. So farmers frequently are food insecure, which is quite ironic, right? Because they're producing commodity crops. And commodity crops are again based in the economy. And one result of commodity crops is that some foods are radically overproduced. And so they have to find something to do with that food because they have it and there's money to be had. So we find these over-processed foods in our school lunches. We find corn syrup, as a prime example, in everything because it's cheap and ready and we have it and there's an economy based around it. I currently have some friends visiting from Budapest, Hungary, and they have noticed that everything in the United States is extremely sweet, and it's kind of thrown them off. But I suspect that's because they're not used to the level of corn syrup in their food that we have here in the United States.
So this quest for food information and understanding the biological change that you felt in your body as a young woman, young mother, took you to it took you down this path even further in relation to getting those answers, and then the whole Victory Garden initiative. Again, this is such a beautiful story because so much of what we talk about at Mount Mary is following your passion, and that you just need to get started somewhere. You don't have to figure it all out the first day, but just get started. And I'm sure there were times that people were thinking, Gretchen, you need to be able to pay the bills and support your children. And
Yes.
So talk a little bit about how that process evolved for you that took you to the Victory Garden Initiative.
Well, I think that there's just so many things that happened. While I recognized my own personal story around food, I recognize that there is a story that relates to everyone. There's a story of us as it relates to the food system. So my personal story is not unique. And I could see my story playing out in many people around me whether it was family members, but most recently, or maybe most poignantly, as I developed professionally, related to the clients that I was working with. I'd moved to Milwaukee, my first urban experience, and I have a degree in clinical social work, and so I was working with people who were, many of them were chronically mentally ill. And I worked on psych units and in the emergency room. And I would see time and again that no one asked anyone about what they were eating and if that might be affecting their stability. So even if we assumed that the diagnosis of bipolar disorder or whatever their diagnosis was accurate, no one, even after that, was asking if the food they were eating might be contributing to their bipolar extremes. And that's not enough just to ask after the fact. Nobody was asking before. And the first course of action when you walk into a doctor's office with some things that may be presenting as mental health issues, such as mood instability, depression, any of the sadness, anger, whatever they are, is not to inquire about diet at all. It just simply doesn't happen. It doesn't happen on an inpatient psychiatric unit. It doesn't happen in the emergency room. It doesn't really happen anywhere in the medical system. And to me, it was intolerable based on my own experiences with food and how I knew it to affect my mood on a regular basis. And the more I kind of brought this point up, the more I found myself at odds with the larger clinical, social work, and medical system. It didn't seem like we were asking the right questions. It didn't seem like we were focusing on the right issues to really help people become well.
So you started asking those questions, and the reaction? I mean, that's going up against a lot of establishment.
Yes, and I often feel uncomfortable. I know that the people will watch this, and I've said things like this on the radio before, and I know it makes people squirm a little bit, and I have a lot of friends in the medical system, and I don't want to discount their expertise at all. But we need to start asking these questions. What people are eating is affecting us every single day. It's a public health epidemic, and we need to resolve it. We need to go back to our roots, back to where our food came from. We need to eat whole, healthy foods. We cannot continue to separate ourselves, our human ecology, from the ecology of the earth as if they are two separate things, because they simply are not. We can't deny that we come from the earth and that we are part of the earth and we are part of our neighbors, and the things that we do through the food that we eat affect all of those things, and they affect us.
And we know that we have parts of our community where just trying to find a fresh apple or a bag of lettuce, something is difficult. You can go into certain parts of our central city, and there are no fresh fruits or vegetables in those stores, and yet people will buy them if they're available. So have the farmers markets helped serve at least part of the year? We do have 4 seasons in Wisconsin, last I checked. So we maybe don't have the fresh food as much as we'd like, but has that addressed some of it, or do we need to think bigger than that?
Yeah, the reason I landed with Victory Garden Initiative as a solution for making change is I was looking at all the options. I'm passionate about environmental issues, I'm passionate about health issues, I'm passionate about social justice issues, and growing your own food really just nailed it for me. If it's a Venn diagram, it's in the middle, And there are other ways that we can think about changing the food system. I like to break it down into 3 strategies. We can talk about policy changes, and those can be federal or state or local. In our case, with Victory Garden Initiative's work, has helped to change city ordinances so that we can grow food in more parts of the city, as
so
an
people
example.
can have chickens if they want to have chickens
Exactly.
in their yard?
We can now have 4 hens. We don't say chickens because we don't want anybody
That's
getting
right.
afraid of roosters.
No roosters, just
no
girls.
roosters.
Just girls.
Only
okay.
girls. So we can look at policy change, and then we can look at market change, which is what a farmer's market might do. How do we bring more farm fresh produce immediately from Wisconsin to neighborhoods? Fondy Food Market is an excellent example of an inner city farmer's market that does that. And then there's, of course, a grassroots level of change. And growing your own food is really that core grassroots. I mean, what is more grassroots than growing your own food? Even our founding fathers literally back to the history of this country, believed agriculture to be a revolutionary act, which is an interesting thing to think about. There's literature on the internet about the agrarian revolution, which many people believe that we're about to enter. I like to think of it as an evolution, because revolution sounds a little dangerous. But evolution, I can go with evolution.
Less frightening.
Less frightening, more peaceful. Yeah.
But still a change agent.
But still a change. But if we can grow our own food right where we are, the benefits of that are, they're holistic, they're deep, deep down. There's so many benefits. Not only can we end up with a product of having access to food, it's right there. I walk up my front driveway, there's kale, I harvest it, I have it for dinner. I don't have to take a trip to the store. But it also reminds us where we came from, what kind of the cycle of life that we're a part of. When we grow it ourselves, our children will eat it. My son actually came to me the other day and he said, "Mom, the other children don't have that many vegetables in their lunch, and like I do."
So he's like worried about the kids aren't getting enough.
He's a little worried they're
That's
not
sweet.
getting enough. But he is naturally just eating these vegetables. I don't ask my children to eat vegetables. They just do it because they participate in growing it. And this is any child, if they grow food with you, they will eat the food and they won't think twice about it. They will walk around a garden and graze and put things in their mouth that are good for them. Mm-hmm.
When you started the conversation today, you talked about we sort of get the food that we seek, right? I mean, back then, you mentioned World War II and just as women went back to work, and the food industry responded with convenience, shelf life, longevity, and so how do we get that message back that we really do care about having ingredients that we can pronounce? Mm-hmm. I always say if I can't pronounce it, I probably shouldn't buy it. And I was following a family that would not buy any food product that had more than 5 ingredients, and they had to be able to pronounce them. The kids had to be able to pronounce them as well, and how they changed up their diet and felt healthier as a result of it. Mm-hmm. So the food industry wants to make money, and they don't want to lose out on what choices are as consumers we make. So, I mean, clearly you look at the movement to gluten-free items, that's a reaction to the marketplace. Mm-hmm. How do we get the food industry to hear us and to listen? I suspect some within the industry have changed.
Yeah, it's really as simple as buying it. You have to spend your money where your belief system is every single time, not just related to the food system, but anything that we can do to spend our money in a way that represents our values is so critical. When I grow a lot of my own food in the city, there's no way that I can grow all of the food that I eat in the city. It's just not possible. But we can grow some. And the stuff that we can't grow, we need to make a real statement. It's very powerful to change the economic system through our own dollars. I buy from a CSA, a community-supported agriculture farm. So essentially, I pay at the beginning of the season to get a box of vegetables all year long. And I know the farmers, and I realize that I just sent their daughter to college, at least in part, by the things that I do. That money, none of it was moved anywhere. It stayed in my community. I'm responsible for my community members' livelihood, and they for me. And there's a lot of power in spending your money that way. I've wondered if we all stopped using credit cards, for example. If we could just get that 3% right back here in Milwaukee, all of a sudden, what would happen?
Well, and you think about growing power and how we've now seen a local movement for just for growing, and that we now know that urban areas can grow food in buildings, so that this doesn't have to become, we can't do it in the dead of winter because we can't grow things. That there is sort of an entrepreneurial spirit that has come into the picture as folks here in Milwaukee have determined, yes, there's a marketplace for this, right? Mm-hmm.
Right.
If you can't get to the farm, at least you can get close to the items and where they're growing and know how they're growing.
Yes, increasingly people are entering small entrepreneurial efforts to make salsa, pickles, sell herbs. Many of the entrepreneurial efforts that I see are maybe peri-urban. So small farms selling directly to restaurants, higher end restaurants where people are choosing to spend their dollars in that way every single time they dine out. It's another very important layer. And I have a lot of farming friends who are supported through that. I think in urban areas, my prediction is that these entrepreneurial efforts will increase, but they're going to be very, very small efforts. If you can imagine somebody who lives next to a large vacant space in an inner city neighborhood, that piece of land can grow food for the community, and people can use food stamps and whatnot to buy that food. But it's also an exercise in a barter economy, or potentially an exercise in making that small amount of money that just adds to your monthly income in a way that you maybe still need support from other governmental agencies. But these are small microeconomies that start something in a neighborhood that maybe frequently is otherwise in deeper poverty than it needs to be. So I think these microeconomies are really important. They build community engagement. They build the lifeblood and the network of the community. And they don't have to be big. The food industry does not have to think bigger. It needs to think smaller. It needs to think community. We've said that a few times.
And this is applicable too if you think about the world food need. When you talk about food security, we certainly know that there are parts of the world where food is really a regular concern. So when we think about the small of growth, of food growth, you're saying this is a model that can really be scaled anywhere.
Right. Yes.
And I know microloans are being applied to countries where if women just can have access to a cow that can be milked, that they can sell, that the money comes back to their families, and it's enough to sustain their families. Right. So this is scalable in a big world too.
Right. I also think we have to decide what if we mean it, and I'm going to give an example of that. We have to look at the ironies of the way that we live from day to day, and really think about, what do we want to do next? So, for example, Milwaukee sits on 20% of the world's fresh water, because the Great Lakes comprise 20% of the entire world's fresh water. That is a miracle. That's what we have, the resource that we have sitting at our fingertips. So, for example, again, there's a drought in California. That's going to directly affect the water usage efforts of people around the country towards Lake Michigan. So what is it that if we want to protect Lake Michigan, or the Great Lakes in general, what is it that we're willing to do to protect Lake Michigan? Are we willing to not eat foods from California? And are we willing to focus on creating that local food system right here so that maybe California doesn't need our water? So every apple, every pumpkin, every anything that we bring here from a different region brings their watershed into our region, and vice versa.
So when you think about the political dynamic of food, there's a huge political dynamic of food. As much as we want to think there's an altruistic and humane side to the food story, there's a huge political dynamic. And let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face in getting our community, our larger community, to talk about the importance of food health.
Yeah. Well, I like to work around all of that. I believe in working around all of that. I believe that the time is now to just make a decision to change on our own. I think it's beneficial to vote. I think it's beneficial to work towards policy change. I think it's beneficial to hope and strive towards economics and politics separating in some way that's better for public health. But I don't necessarily think it's going to get us there the quickest. I do think that just taking the initiative to do it on our own is the most direct route, and it's very unifying politically. It doesn't take neither a liberal Democrat nor a conservative Republican disagrees with making change on your own. It's not going to polarize the country anymore. This is an effort that causes overlap on all spectrums. And actually, I guess I won't call out any specific names, but I had a really great conversation with someone who traditionally supports, earns money, is political in every way that it seems conservative. And we talked about blue-collar roots, and we talked about helping yourself, and we talked about getting a job done of your own personal power. Like, how powerful are we? How powerful can we be to make these changes? And when we continuously put ideas that are ideals into the mix of getting good work done, we end up challenging each other. But if we can focus on the work itself and move away from which camp the work itself lies in, that's where we're going to make change. And that's, to me, the power of grassroots, just growing your own food. It just does the job.
And just get started.
It just gets you started, yes.
I think we've probably come to the point in our program where we want to ask you a few of our favorite questions that we ask of all of our guests. And for those of you who've been with us before, you know that these 5 questions that we ask are modeled after the 19th century French writer Marcel Proust. And it's been adapted many times over the years for those of you familiar with the Actors Studio and James Lipton. He's made them rather famous. But our Mount Mary version comes to us from our students. Our students, you met earlier, you heard from Margaret and some of our students who are advocates for the Women's Leadership Institute, and also our students in the communications program, our mass media program. They're fun, and they're intended to be easy, and they offer us an additional glimpse into Gretchen's heart and soul. Are you ready for our question?
I think I am.
Okay. Describe your life using only a song title.
Okay, this is really hard.
1 or 2, maybe, if that.
And the only thing I could come up with, I have to say, was the song that actually, I went with the first thing that came to my mind, and that after I read this question made me sing for the rest of the day, and it was the Beatles song, We Can Work It Out.
That's a good answer. What is your biggest pet peeve?
I liked this question, actually, because I've been noticing, anytime something is a pet peeve, I try to figure out what that says about me. Because oftentimes I guess it could be a projection of myself, right? But I think my pet peeve is, it has something to do with an unwillingness to figure it out. An unwillingness to say, there's a problem, I'm gonna ask questions, I'm gonna do research, I'm gonna play with the idea, I'm gonna go for something. An unwillingness just to go for it and figure out how to solve a problem that I've run into sometimes.
What is the most unique class that you've taken?
I took a class where I went to Florida for 3 weeks during my undergrad, subtropic ecology. It was incredible. I was never planning to go into the sciences in any way, shape, or form, but when I realized there was an opportunity to go to Florida, and I could do it somehow by some small miracle, I signed up. And to have that kind of tour guide in an ecosystem that you're not familiar with to explain all of the things that are happening, and to get to see obscure places in a foreign, it's not a foreign land exactly, but from rural Illinois, somewhat foreign. It was truly a remarkable experience that I'm always grateful for. It really was part of, at the Everglades National Park, I saw one of many passionate moments in my life where we went to the bathroom, flushed the toilets. The water went through a series of tanks in a beautiful greenhouse atrium with butterflies and birds flying around, and the water came out drinkable, and that was the water they offered you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Wow, it was completely based in ecology, biology, those kind of things. So pay attention, when something just strikes you, when something for better or worse, good or bad, when it blows your mind, when it tickles your stomach, when it makes you angry, maybe especially when it makes you angry, when it makes you sad, whatever those moments are, like figure them out, tie them together, write them down, go through your life and figure out those moments.
And usually you can connect
those
dots.
fire moments are so important. That was one of my fire moments there.
That's wonderful to know. What is the most non-essential item you tend to always carry with you?
I always have
Big
to wear big
earrings?
earrings. I don't know why. I always have them on.
It makes you happy.
They
Something
do.
about- yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's your,
Ever
and your
since high
your own
school.
personal statement.
I guess so, yeah. Somebody told me once they were fishing lures, but
And what profession other than your own would you most love to do?
this is sort of ironic. But I kind of want to, I want to be an unprofessional. I want to maybe have a life where, at least for 5 years, where I actually just stay home and I write poetry and I read a lot and I grow my own food and I learn how to build things and fix things, become my own plumber. So I want to be a jack of all trades, essentially, where I just figure out how to do many, many things that are necessary for living in my own home.
Sounds good. I think you've set yourself up well for that. One of the things we like to do also, as you heard early on, is to invite you in for questions. And no doubt, Gretchen has touched a nerve somewhere in your own thinking. And we've got microphones in 2 locations here, and we invite you to go ahead and line up, and we'll take your questions now for Gretchen. And Margaret, were you going to start us off again as beautifully as you got us going?
Okay, so one of the questions I have for you is you did mention that you do initiatives in the urban area. Have you guys ever tried to maybe get those vacant lots from the city? Because the city of Milwaukee has so many. Do you either purchase or acquire some of those lots to turn them into community gardens at all?
We do. Yeah, we've been working with the city really since we started, which is moving towards 6 years. And there is a lease program. You can lease land from the city to start a community garden. And we have also recently purchased land. I guess it was almost 2 years ago. We purchased 1.5 acres from the city of unused land, which is now an urban farm in the Harambe neighborhood, which you'd all be welcome, of course, to come to. It's a really special place to have 1.5 acres of land close to the east side of Milwaukee, which makes it very integrated increasingly. But it's now sort of a lush paradise of growing food, whereas before it was completely vacant, hard pan clay, unarable land that and nothing grew there. So it's pretty special. But there are also programs, if anybody's interested in leasing land from the city, I can certainly connect you in that way.
I guess I can follow up with another question then.
Sure.
Can anyone in the community then come to these gardens and purchase food, or do they actively participate in the growing and agriculture of food?
Yeah, every project is different. Some traditional community gardens are comprised of just plots where you can rent a plot and you grow your own food all season long. Concordia Gardens, which is the 1.5 acre farm that I was talking about, is a combination of many uses. So we have a community garden where you can rent plots. We have an urban food forest, which is essentially an ecologically based orchard that has many different species in it. Many of them are edible, and it's pretty young. It's only a couple years old, so it's not in high production yet. And then we have a more traditional vegetable farm, and the kids that are part of our program. We have education programs for children. They grow the food. They help us harvest the food. On Thursdays, that's tomorrow, we have a farm stand where the kids actually harvest the food. I think it's our last one for the season, actually. They harvest the food and then they sell it. They determine the price, they determine the value, they bring in customers. They get to have a little bit of, actually in that program, they earn all of the money for themselves and they get to take it home. Nice. It's really fun.
So the business model for the Victory Garden Initiative is sales, obviously, and then do you have grants or funding from outside sources too?
Yeah, we get funding. We have a pretty diversified funding mix, I would say. We sell gardens, so anybody who wants a garden can just purchase one and we will come and put it at your house. And we get a lot of grants. Children's education programs especially are very grant fundable. And we do a lot of fundraising, corporate sponsorships, donors, individual donors. We're always trying to ensure some level of stability by earning revenue and just by selling, offering a service, doing classes that people pay for, those kind of things. But always ensuring that we don't say no to anyone. So we're always trying to offer everything that we offer to someone who can afford it, we offer to someone who can't, and we find a way to subsidize that. That's our model and our goal.
And it fits the model of, either giving people fish or teaching them to fish, which is you teach people how to grow their own food or where to get it,
right.
And they will come into a much better place in their lives.
Right.
So. Well, I think we have another question, please.
Hi, what is the best advice you could give to somebody who is looking to be an entrepreneur?
The best advice for someone who is looking to be an entrepreneur? Well, for me, and this probably is true for many entrepreneurs, I can't speak, for everyone, there's a level of planning and thinking, but largely at some point you have to go for it. And you just have to put every ounce of what you have into making something manifest. That's hard and fun and exciting, but you have to be willing to take some risk. And I think that's really moving forward in the food economy. I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see people moving towards taking some risk and moving away from the rules of our current food system, which is a good thing.
Follow-up question, if that's okay. So along with you talking about risk, do you have any like a huge regret of something you've done in the past relating to the business, or is it more like everything's just like, oh, well, that was unfortunate, but it's okay now?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, sometimes I think I can drive things too much, and I don't allow for more people to get involved when I'm driving too much. Because of that, you can easily step on other people's toes. You can impose yourself a little bit too much. I think many entrepreneurs would probably say that. But I tend to be pretty kind-hearted, and so I do recognize when I do that. And, I'm a clinical social worker, so I try to read body language, all of those things. But, it can cause a certain level of friction when you're driving towards a goal. And sometimes that's really healthy, and it's necessary. And sometimes you can just upset someone who you want to be your advocate or your ally. And that's just a really fine line to walk.
Okay,
And
thank you.
we've heard from some of our entrepreneurial, Rachel, please, it looks like we have another question coming in. From some of our entrepreneurial folks who've, done the studio series that oftentimes it's also staying focused on what the core is.
Yeah.
There'll be people coming to you with, I've got another great idea, but it's going to move you in this direction, and it may not get you to the spot where you. And so you have to really have that sort of laser focus, don't you?
Absolutely. And, I think of that as strategic planning. I get ideas coming towards me all the time, including my own, actually. I have to hide from my own ideas so I can stay focused on the big picture. And if you can think that through in a strategic way and start to write down where you want to go, it's really helpful to stay focused. That said, every good strategic plan has a next iteration. So when something isn't working, it's okay to readjust. Just, keep making it better each time. Keep going towards the goal, but don't be afraid to change your goal if it's not making sense anymore. But yeah, hiding from too many ideas is a good thing. Too much information can be frustrating, and just staying focused.
Thank you, Gretchen. That's a great lead into my question. I'm Professor Wilcox. I'm chair of the undergrad justice program here. And this is a question about policy change. And I commend you for the successful work that you've done to change municipal ordinances. My question has to do with whether you at some point faced a difficult decision about pursuing national, federal policy change as well as working on the municipal level, and if you needed to kind of choose one over the other. And yeah, there's a case I have in mind specifically, which is some of the national brands like Kraft, for example, actually have products that they sell in Europe that are the same products as are sold here in America, but the European products contain no artificial chemicals or colors or dyes.
Yeah.
Why don't we have that here?
Right.
So what do you think?
Yeah. That's it. These are important issues, and they're so big. I think there are people who are really, really good at working with policy issues. They're probably more diplomatic than I am. You know, I'm not sure about that. They probably are skilled in talking about law and reading, you know, documents that are hard for someone with my brain to understand. And so when I get involved in a policy issue like that, it's usually on behalf of someone else. In other words, somebody emailed me and they said, I'd really like to do something related to this policy issue, this awareness issue, and then I might help them organize an event in some way that I can within the capacity of the organization. And I used to be more, I mean, it's really kind of back to what Lynn said. There are so many ideas, and I used to be more involved in every policy issue that would come across my table. I would feel extreme outrage about these things, and I still do. But realizing that I have to contain my outrage so that I can focus on the positive and follow the yeses, follow towards what I can do. But policy it really is important. For me, maybe I'm too impatient to stay that kind of long haul. For someone else, that seems like the quicker fix, you know? I was involved in a very interesting lobbying session in Madison about BPA a few years ago. A friend of mine who ran and she was the ED of an organization that did work with breast cancer survivors. And BPA was one of those hot button issues. If you know what that is, it's the chemical that's inside cans, plastic. We all, if we were tested for BPA now, would be found positive for it. It's everywhere. And it's known to be a carcinogen. And so she was lobbying to get it removed from children's plastics and that kind of thing. It's especially bad for children. But I had a little slice of what the lobbying world looks like in that moment. And I saw the sweat dripping off the lobbyist from the chemical, the BPA company, as he lied on the stand in front of a room full of 50 very impassioned people who were activists like myself, saying we don't want this in our children's drinking receptacles anymore. We want it out. And it was, I'm getting the chills now thinking about it, watching this man be grilled by the interviewer to help him to admit that this was not good, and it was known. And he sweated and lied, and then at the moment he could no longer deny it anymore, the whole room just sat in awe at kind of what we had seen, you know. That's hard, you know. But if that's something that you're passionate about and that's the way your mind works to think in the policy realm, it's needed. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we know we're always respectful of everybody's time, yours and our students who have to be, and professors who need to be in class at some point here. So what we want to do is bring this conversation to a close. And I want to thank the students who made this program possible. We have student advocates who work with the Women's Leadership Institute all year long to make the program successful. And a very special thanks to Gretchen, and a round of applause for Gretchen for a beautiful. Thank you. And I'm sure we can follow your work on your website.
Mm-hmm. Please do.
And the Victory Garden Initiative. And thanks, and everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.